Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's extraordinary, the response that's going around the world, and particularly in Australia at this particular time, in regards to electromagnetic radiation and its emissions, not only in 5G situations, but also with smart meters, any type of Wi-Fi arrangement. I guess this is really an awareness situation where we're trying to show you how it was successful in other areas. I don't know if you've heard of the Wilson's Creek Telstra Tower scenario, which was a development application which was done to council, and we were successful in stopping that, and we'll go through the strategy and how that worked and how it applied. And then there's also the other one, which was the Dundas Street situation in Coogee and Randwick in New South Wales. Now, I don't know if anyone saw that it was on a current affair. The street itself had eight doctors and 4 lawyers who were living on that one street. And it's amazing when 5G or electromagnetic radiation is placed in people's backyards, particularly doctors, they get a bit upset about it. And so that's when we were engaged, or I was engaged, and went over to see if we can sort this out. Dr. Cooper's part of the team, Greg Malik's part of the team, and we've put together a really good team to stop this, well, not stop it, but to assist people with their problems in regards to electromagnetic radiation. Now, just to let you know what happened with the Dundas Street arrangement, it was part of a strategy because it wasn't just Dundas Street that I was looking after in regards to TPG, in regards to 5G. There was about 30 other communities that I was dealing with, or we were dealing with, throughout Australia. And there was a real strategy that was used, and we were successful. We stopped over 900 sites in one go. 5G. And what this is all about is about giving you a bit of an idea of how it worked, how we did it, and it also gives you an understanding of how simple the process can be. There's no guarantees that it'll actually work for you, but what we do is it's just to give you a bit of an insight as to how to spread the awareness. Once more people are aware, particularly councils, within councils, your members of parliament, etc., because that's really where we've been targeting a lot of this work. And I hope and I believe there might be some councillors actually with us today, which is wonderful. And it'd be great to know that, and very welcome to anybody from the industry that's here. If there's any industry people, we welcome you, members of the public, everybody. This is really an awareness campaign to explain to you what 5G is, but not just 5G, but what electromagnetic radiation is, and how it can affect us, and what remedies, possible remedies, are available out there as far as the law is concerned. Now, joining me, just to let you know, I'm actually a barrister, and I work, well, my chambers are situated in Tasmania at the Michael Kirby Chambers, and I've been, through my career as a barrister, I've been mentored by an amazing man, and his name is Greg Malik, SC, who's sitting right here. Greg's a wonderful man, and I'd just like to explain who he is. So in a sense, I was his apprentice, is a better way of putting it. I was what's known as his pupil or his reader. And he gave me that fire in my belly to keep going, and I thank him for that. And so I'm just going to explain who Greg is. So as and he'll give us a brief talk later on, and it'll be open up to Q&A fully from everyone. Just go for it. You can record this if you want, that's fine. We've got some recordings going on here, I believe. So this is something to spread out to everyone. Okay, so Greg Malik. Greg Malik is a senior counsel. Sometimes they're referred to as QCs, but he's a SILK or an SC. Greg commenced his legal practice back in 1975 and has been a leading barrister throughout Australia, and has represented many clients in all sorts of jurisdictions, including the High Court. He is the current Chief Commissioner of the Integrity Commission in Tasmania. He's also the current Deputy President of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal of Australia, commonly known as the AAT. He also held a statutory role on the board of the National Crime Authority. He's the current president of the International Society for the Reform of Criminal Law. He also is the head of Michael Kirby Chambers in Tasmania, and he also appeared in electromagnetic radiation restraint applications with me by his side as his junior. So that's Greg Malik. So, thank you. Now we also have with us Dr. Russell Cooper, and Dr. Russell Cooper is a very, very important component, not only Dr. Cooper, but other medical doctors out there that we have that's at our disposal and at your disposal. And what Dr. Cooper here is for is to sort of give you how can I explain it? To explain to you what electromagnetic radiation is, to explain the health implications, to explain some of the ARPANSA. You've probably heard of ARPANSA before. Well, ARPANSA is our regulatory standard body that sets up standards within the industry, and he's going to explain a lot about that. What Dr. Cooper is going to do is sort of open your eyes as to what this stuff can do to you, or do to the public. He has done plenty of reports for patients of his, which we can use as evidence in court, or as evidence in trying to stop these towers, to say, look, here's some evidence, here we go. So I guess the best way to explain this is he's what we consider our expert witness. Okay. Now, Dr. Cooper was a witness, or an expert witness in a case called Mitochondrial, which sort of started setting the light in regards to some sort of recognition in regards to electromagnetic hypersensitivity, and but we'll explain all this to you as we go forward. So Dr. Cooper is first going to give his explanation as to what he sees, in his opinion, what he believes and why this stuff he believes is harmful to human health. And he's going to go through some studies, and I guess the best way to explain it to you is Dr. Cooper's, yes, he's into science, but he's a medical doctor. He is not somebody that goes out and does, looks at, how can I explain it, put studies together. He looks at the studies and then he uses his own medical expertise to determine whether or not it's safe or not. And nobody else can really sort of tell him, you can't do that, you can do that, blah, blah, blah. It's his role as a doctor to actually work that out. And I'll explain how that process works later on. Anyway, without further ado, we'll start off with Dr. Cooper. Once Dr. Cooper's finished, we'll have a short break, and then it'll be my turn, and then Greg Malik will be up next after me, and then we'll have a big Q&A session. Okay, thank you.
Guys, welcome. This is an extraordinary opportunity for us all. So a lot to discuss, a lot to go through, a lot to understand, and a lot to interpret, both in our own lives and the lives of the community and the lives of society in general. You like the title? So it's an opportunity. So let's look at some housekeeping. So I've been invited as an integrated medical practitioner to speak with you today. I have many, many patients, into the hundreds of patients with electromagnetic radiation sensitivity. So I speak from my specialized training in preventive medicine, anti-aging medicine, and integrative medicine, and I have 37 years of clinical practice. But the main reason I'm here is as a concerned doctor treating an ever-increasing number, a spiraling number of electromagnetically sensitive people who have what I call EMF radiation sickness. And this is as a result of us all having more and more devices and more industry infrastructure for the use of these devices and the interconnectivity of these devices. Now, as if 2G and 3G and 4G was not enough, we now have 5G, and it literally takes the cake with regard to the potential that I believe that it can injure us. So any bolding or underlining is purely for me. I suggest that you take your phones out of your pockets. If anyone's wearing any of those Bluetooth devices in their ears, maybe to remove them because people next to you who have EHS may be reacting to you. I had a person just the other day who was taking her daughter swimming and she started palpitating. She was in line and the chap in front of her was speaking on his smartwatch. She was palpitating because of his smartwatch. So if anyone's wearing smartwatches, there may be people next to you who start feeling unwell. This is how crazy this whole story is becoming. We have people amongst us who are so super sensitive that they can collapse, they can feel desperately weak, tired, fatigued as a result of ubiquitous EMF. So as Ray said, I welcome you all here today from all walks of life. Let's strap ourselves in and let's get going. So, since we live in Australia and since we're under the laws of this country, we need to look at the ARPANSA standard. And the ARPANSA standard is it's a government, it was developed by a government agency called ARPANSA, and they're the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. And what they have done is created the standard that works between 3 kilohertz and 300 gigahertz, so it's the radio frequency transmission in that range. And it's mandated by ACMA. And this standard is based on the international standards from ICNIRP, which is the International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. It's almost like an oxymoron, because we're not protected from non-ionizing radiation, we're protected from ionizing radiation. No one's protecting us from non-ionizing radiation. That's why we're here today. Okay. So let's, in the 300-page document, it's not a 300-page document, but it's a large document from ARPANSA, the standard. In the forward, they state, there is currently a level of concern about radio frequency exposure which is not fully alleviated by existing scientific data. It is true that data regarding the biological effects at levels below the limits specified in the standard are incomplete and inconsistent, and the health implications of these data are not known, and such data could not be used in setting the level of basic restrictions in the standard. This was 2002. They continue to say research is continuing in many countries into the possible effects of health arising from RF exposure. Okay, recognition of this, the Radiation Health Committee will continue to monitor the results, which is great. Okay. On the desk here next to me, I have the Bioinitiative report. That is one copy, that's not multiple copies. It's one copy. 1,557-page document of over 2,000 independent scientific research publications with 24 sections, and each section is edited by a world-leading authority in medicine and science, and these are experts in the dangers of electromagnetic radiation. Okay. So what I'm basically getting at is I believe that there is more than enough scientific data to elucidate the potential dangers of interacting with this technology. On page 1 of the forward, the standard goes on to say, the standard discusses the public health precautionary principle. You'll keep hearing this word, precautionary principle, to electromagnetic fields. However, they say, but there are costs involved in adopting precautions, which is fascinating, and go on to say that provided this can be done and achieved at a reasonable expense, and the incorporation of arbitrary additional safety factors beyond the exposure limits of the standard is not supported. So it seems to me like ARPANSA is telling us, well, it's good to adopt a precautionary principle, but essentially, unless it's blatantly obvious, nothing is going to happen. Now, interestingly, ARPANSA in their forward put a little note in there to industry. And what they essentially say is it is recognised that the standard does not operate in isolation from the legal framework within Australia. Relevant Australian occupational health, safety and environmental laws provide obligation on employers and the designers, manufacturers and suppliers of plant or equipment to ensure that their activities or their plant and equipment do not represent a risk to the health and safety of their employees or third parties, we are the third party, who may be affected by them. In effect, such laws require relevant parties to continually assess and improve the safety and health impact of their activities. Okay. So are we really protected, guys? Okay, so the Alpanza standard, it was not designed to protect us from non-ionizing radiation. It protects us from being burnt, like the burns of radiotherapy if someone is having cancer. The standard does not disclose 24-hour exposure levels. It does not disclose overnight exposure levels. Remember, we're lying in one spot, unless you've got restless legs and you're all over the bed, but essentially you're in one spot for about 8 to 10 hours. Okay? And you're being exposed to whatever's in your ambient environment. And we have no data on those levels of exposure. The specific absorption rate, which is, as you can see, the picture shows how the radiation actually interacts with your biology, with your anatomy, and how far in it goes. There are limits on that, and those limits are 0.08 watts per kilogram for whole body exposure and 2 watts per kilogram for head exposure. Okay. So the International Agency for Research into Cancer back in 2002 classified extremely low frequency magnetic fields as a possible carcinogen, grouped according to group 2B. And in 2011, they then classified radio frequency, which is the 3 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz, as likewise group 2B, possible carcinogenic. And this was on the basis of the Interphone study, which was a 13-country collaboration of many thousands of people who developed cancer. And this was in relation to the frequency of use of their mobile phones. And I'll talk about that later. But there are some authors now who believe in 2018 and now moving into 2019 that the classification is not good enough. That radio frequency electromagnetic energy, radio frequency electromagnetic radiation, you'll keep hearing different terms to describe the same thing, should actually be classified as a group 1 carcinogen along the same lines as acetaldehyde, arsenic, asbestos, benzopyrene, and formaldehyde. And this is based on some of the new work by the eminent Professor Leonard Hardell from Sweden. And this is based on the Ramazzini Institute study and also the recently published US National Toxicology Program study on rats. And Professor Hardell is a researcher and doctor of over 80 mobile phone and cordless phone publications. Just to get into some of the details, you're going to hear a lot of details. If it all gets too heady and too technical, just let it wash over. It's not important. I'm not going to test you on it. But it's important for me just to get it out, if that's okay. So this study that was done, the NTP study, was on rats, 90 male and 90 female rats, exposed to 1.5, 3, and 6 watts per kilogram radio frequency radiation for 9 hours a day for 7 days for a total of 2 years. And what was found was they had an increased incidence of brain tumors called the glioma and an increased incidence of malignant heart tumors called malignant schwannomas. And these findings corroborated with the findings from the Ramazzini Institute. Okay. And so this was very powerful work. This was done under the auspices of a major US government institution. And it was concluded that there's clear evidence, this is Hardell's conclusion, that there's clear evidence that radio frequency radiation is a human carcinogen causing glioma and vestibular schwannoma, There is some evidence of increased risk of developing thyroid cancer. Always remember that these new mobile phones, the transmitter's not at the top, the transmitter's at the bottom. So when you're holding it near to you, and I'm not going to hold this too near to me, you are actually irradiating your thyroid, salivary gland, and parotid, and there's an increase of tumors in these areas. Crazy stuff. Okay. There is some evidence of increased risk of developing thyroid cancer and clear evidence that radiofrequency radiation is a multi-site carcinogen. It can happen to you anywhere. Based on the preamble of the IARC monographs, radiofrequency, according to Professor Hardell and Dr. Carlsberg, should be classified as carcinogenic to humans, group 1. This is the Ramazzini Institute study. Here, rats, about 2,500 rats, were exposed to 1.8 gigs of field strength of either 0, 5, 25, or 50 volts per meter. So we'll go into all the numbers so that you understand that in a moment. They were exposed for 19 hours a day, like all of us are exposed to routers, sometimes 24 hours a day. It's a router at home. When you sleep, the router's on, the Wi-Fi's on. You get in your car, you're exposed to Wi-Fi. You go to work, you're exposed to Wi-Fi. It's virtually 24 hours a day. So this was only 19 hours a day. Remember, the Alpanza field strength limit is 50 volts per meter. So it was up at the limit. The average whole body, 0.08 watts per kilogram, and the head SAR, 2 watts per kilogram. Okay. The treated female rats in the 50 volts per meter group had an increased incidence of malignant gliomas. That wasn't statistically significant, but there were more. The study revealed an increased incidence of tumor types similar to those associated with the use of wireless phones, glioma, and acoustic neuroma, which is a non-malignant tumor. Okay, so again, Miller, another researcher, believes, like Professor Hardell, that there have been enough studies, so 9 case-controlled studies with radiofrequency radiation in Europe, where they have found very similar results. And when considered these studies, where the endpoint is seeing if there's an increased risk of brain tumors, along with the non-malignant endpoints being acoustic neuroma, along with the animal studies, they now believe there's enough evidence, again, for radiofrequency radiation to be classified as an IARC group 1. So let's go back in time. So in the early days, back in the early 2000s, the IARC monograph, volume 80, this enormous amount of information, compiled all the research for the risk of leukemia as a result of these power lines, which are emitting magnetic energy, very slow wave magnetic energy. One particular study, I pulled out a short study in 2000, 514 cases, 1,013 controls, and the measurement of electromagnetic fields from power lines is measured in flux density. I don't know if any of you have got the little meters. This is a milligaussian device. It measures milligauss. Now, the other name for, or the other but equivalent measure for milligauss is Tesla. So micro Tesla and mini Gauss are interchangeable, but there's 0.1 of a micro Tesla to 1 milligauss. So a micro Tesla is 1/10 of a milligauss. Okay, so in this particular study, less than 0.1 of a micro Tesla, there was no increased incidence of leukemia, but once you got into 0.2 to 0.4, it increased, and greater than 0.4, there was a lot more leukemia. And this is reiterated in a number of other studies, like the Swedish case control study, where children close to these substations and transformers had a much higher increase of leukemia when the magnetic field strength was above 0.3 microtesla. And likewise with the Danish study, you can see that lymphomas and CNS tumors were all much increased once the microtesla potency increased. Okay, so some heavyweight doctors in this industry: Professor Belpo, you'll see the name at the bottom, Professor Hardell, Professor Belyev, Dr. Bergio, and Dr. David Carpenter, who was the lead editor of this amazing document. They, in July last year, published a paper really advocating to governments and to authorities to start taking note of the public health issues related to the promiscuous use of electromagnetic radiation. And they said that unfortunately standards set by most national and international bodies are not protective to human health. Isn't that incredible? The very bodies that are supposed to be protecting us are actually not protecting us. I personally, having seen hundreds and hundreds of patients, I do not at all feel safe under the current standard, because my patients are getting sick under the current standard. So that is not a protective standard. They go on to say the greater the penetration of radio frequency relative to the head-to-head size, the greater the longer lifetime exposure of our children. We have to start remembering that our children are the most vulnerable. They will have the longest exposure to radio frequency than all of us, because with us it's just sort of come on in the last 5, 10, 15 years. But with children, it's from the moment they're in utero right through to death. Now, Ray and I were involved in a situation, a desperate situation. You want to cry when you hear this. A lady who was carrying twins, had her mobile on her belly, and the twins were born with brain cancer. And one of them has died and the other one's in chemo at the moment. Now, if the standard was so protected, why isn't it telling us that women should never have mobile phones on their bellies or anywhere near them? And so these are the things that worry me about the standard. There is no qualification. As long as radiation is under the standard, you're classified as do whatever you want, sleep in front of towers, it doesn't matter. See? We're not being guided by the very authority that should be guiding us. And that's why I'm on the I'm on the cold front. I'm actually on the radiation front, working with people who are suffering day in and day out as a result of exposure within the standard. And that saddens me desperately, because we need better controls. Because we need to protect our children. If we're protecting our children, we're protecting all of us. Interestingly, adults and children are obviously not the same. Children absorb 80% more radiation than adults. Now, these models were based on Fernandez's work, which is based on a 10-year-old child. What about a 2-year-old child? What about a 1-year-old child? What about a child in utero? Okay. So again, Professor Valpome and his colleagues say that thermal and non-thermal health effects of low-intensity non-ionizing radiation continue to provide research data about the rising incidence of brain cancer in children, and that's Hardell's work in 2017, Phillips in England in 2018, I can never pronounce his name, Etxeburia in Spain in 2015, so much so now that in France, and we have a member, one of my patients in the audience, he's had a lot of trouble with Wi-Fi at his daughter's school. In France, they have removed Wi-Fi from preschools and ordered Wi-Fi to be shut down in elementary schools. Imagine, these delicate, beautiful kids of ours going to school. Now, they all want connectivity. They all want to work on their iPads. But to do that, you've got to have very powerful routers. And where are they? Usually on the roof, like a few meters away from these very delicate beings. And some kids are sensitive to this, but the authorities, the principals, the teachers, the education, not interested. Not interested. Okay. So here's the Fernandez study, and visually it's quite nice. You can see the spread on a visual going into the side of the head. Okay, now this is an extraordinary person. This lady, Dr. Martha Herbert, is not only a pediatrician, she's not only a neurologist and a neuroscientist, but she's on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and the Massachusetts General Hospital. And she's a bioinitiative co-author. This is a highly esteemed educator. And she was asked to talk about about autism spectrum disorder and if radio frequency electromagnetic fields has any impact on it. So she wrote a 60-page, 550 citation report on this, which is in section 20 of this extraordinary by-initiative document. And basically what she says is EMF can certainly contribute to degrading the physiological integrity of a system at a cellular and molecular level. Sorry, it's hard to see my own writing. And where are we? And in terms of, it appears to contribute to the pathogenesis causation, not only of autism, but many common illnesses, including cancer, obesity, and diabetes. She goes on to say thousands of papers documenting the adverse health and neurological impacts of EMF, radiofrequency radiation, and that children are more vulnerable than adults. Children with chronic illnesses are even more vulnerable. The claim that Wi-Fi, the claim from Wi-Fi proponents that the only concern is thermal impacts is now definitely outdated scientifically. Very important statement.
Could you please explain thermal and non-thermal?
Okay.
And also
So thermal is heating, whether you get heated up or not.
Yeah.
So we're not supposed to get heated up, so the standard protects us from being overheated, because we know if we get heated from the sun too much, what happens? We get burnt, and that burning is oxidation and inflammation. But what the standard doesn't let us know and inform us of is that non-ionizing radiation, as you will see later in the presentation, causes inflammation and oxidation and is damaging us inside, damaging our nervous system and damaging our brains and damaging our bodies. Where are we up to? Okay. So there have been a number of studies, a collation of studies here, 26,000 cases. We developed tumors, and the tumors were found more on the side where they were using the phone. So this was a study of mobile phone use to see if there was a correlation with radio frequency. And people, you can see this word OR, or odds ratio, equal to 1.324. So there's a 32% increased risk of brain cancer, and especially on the side where they're using their phones. And that's reiterated by other studies, and there are lots and lots of studies, and these are all collective, like meta-analysis studies. Again, the number that keeps coming up is an odds ratio of about 1.3. So use of mobile phones for less than 10 years, there doesn't seem to be any increased risk, but once it's over 10 years, the risk increases. This was a fascinating study. Mobile phone use and the risk of brain tumors, a systematic review of association between study quality, source of funding, and research outcomes. Now you'd think that science is like sacrosanct, is untouchable, and pure, and honest, and correct. Well, the science might be, but the interpretation of it isn't. And the meddling, and you will see in the interphone study, there was actually meddling in the methodology where people who spoke on the phone too long were actually cut out. You see, any more than 5 hours, because the researchers didn't believe anybody could spend more than 5 hours on their phone. So their data wasn't applicable. So if they got a tumor for being on the phone for more than 5 hours, that wasn't part of the final analysis. This is what we're dealing with. I'm sorry to bring this up, but it's true. So basically what they said was that meta-analysis of 14 case-controlled studies, they found there was, as I said, no increase under 10 years, but over 10 years or more than 1,640 hours use, that's the unmagical number. There was a significant 1.33 times increase in risk of brain tumors. Interestingly, government-funded as well as phone industry-funded studies did not show any increased risk of brain cancer. And the authors went on to say studies with higher quality showed a trend towards higher risk of brain cancer. All right, okay. So what was Oppanza's comment? Oppanza's comment on that was that they agreed that over 10 years the odd ratio for cancer was 1.33, and yet extraordinarily in a technical update of 2017, mobile phone use is deemed as not causally linked to radiofrequency electromagnetic fields. Again, in this technical summary, the report concluded that the science behind The Alpanza RF standard remains sound. This is their words, not mine. That the science behind the standard remains sound, and that the exposure limits in the standard continue to provide a high degree of protection against the known health effects of radio frequency electromagnetic energy. Professionally, I do not consider an increased risk of brain cancer after 10 years mobile phone use a high degree of protection. Most of us have used mobile phones for a lot more than 10 years and possibly more than 1,640 hours. Okay, so let's get into all the numbers and all the terms and all the units. You know, if you go and buy one of these and you get a reading, do you know what you're reading and how it all fits in and what it all means? So volts per meter, you've probably heard of volts per meter. NT, what's NT? Nano Tesla. UT, micro Tesla. MG, milligauss. UW, microwatts per meter squared. But what about MW, milliwatts per meter squared? What about milliwatts per centimeter squared? Everybody uses a different system. What about milliwatts per nanowatts per meter squared, or W kg, which is watts per kilogram? Okay, so we need to know your numbers. When you get into this business and you start advocating and you start talking to people, you need to know what you're talking about. So the building biologists, and we have a building biologist in the room here, so we're going to talk a lot about this. The building biologists, this is their baby. This is what they do. They not only look at if people's houses are toxic from an electromagnetic point of view, but also if they are chemically toxic or poisoned by mold or whatever. Okay, so here we're looking at flux density in microtesla, and the German building biology guidelines say that for sleeping areas, the microtesla should not be above, look at that, microtesla above 0.02. So there's no concern. There's slight concern, 0.02 to 0.1. Severe concern, 0.1 to 0.5. That's where all the leukemias were, in this zone here. And above 0.5 is extreme. And there's the milligauss comparison. So with my little meter, when I put it anywhere near here, I'm at about, there we go. I'm above 10 milligauss. These things are really dangerous. They should be called anti-laptops, because anywhere near your lap, you're irradiating yourself. And you can see the ICNIRP now, isn't this amazing? ICNIRP says you can expose yourself to up to 100 microtesla. 100 microtesla, where anything over 0.5 on a microtesla by the building biologist is considered extremely concerning. As far as field strength goes, so this is where we look at radio frequency. Field strength, we're looking at it, volts per meter. So this is an electric measure. So we're looking at volts per meter, no concern at 0.3, and you'll see on the electromagnetic radiation EME reports, they use volts per meter. Less than 0.3 is considered fine. 0.3 to 1.5, slight concern, and going up to extreme concern. I'm going to show you some EME reports where people are living above 10, 24 hours a day. Okay. And that, according to ICNIRP and to our Australian standard, is considered normal. Okay, radio frequency radiation. So here I have a device which measures, it's an acoustometer, measuring volts per meter and radio frequency, volts per meter on the left, radio frequency on the right. I'll just turn the volume down. And at the moment it's 1 point, it sort of varies. Obviously as I get close to here, it goes up to 1.8. And we're at the moment in microwatts, it's quite low. Jumped up to 4,000 for a moment. So there's a pulse coming from somewhere. Okay.
Are you running that laptop Wi-Fi?
No, I don't have Wi-Fi.
It's all switched off?
I personally haven't got Wi-Fi.
Yeah, it's still getting overrated.
But there may well be Wi-Fi from somewhere. Okay. So Ray mentioned Wilson's Creek. So just to show you how crazy this all is, we were aghast at the fact that if you look at the numbers, and it may be hard to see, So we were aghast that when you look at the European, which is the European Academy of Environmental Medicine 2016 guidelines, they say that one should sleep in under 10 microwatts per meter squared. Okay, and EHS sufferers should be way below 10, maybe 1 or even under 1. So based on the 10 microwatts per meter squared reference, residents 100 to 300 meters, so if you look in this area here, and I'll put my glasses on, so 100 to 300, you can see it goes up to 6.81 and 6.75, so 6,750 microwatts. Now remember, these are all based, they do M, a little m, which is a microwatt per meter squared. So you have to times that by 1,000 to get to milliwatts, and you have to times it by 1,000 to get to microwatts. So a number of 6.75 becomes 6,750. So this was 680 times higher than what then is recommended by the by European and the German building biologists, who view numbers over 1,000 microwatts per meter squared as being extremely worrisome. And all houses were way over the guideline limit. Okay. So one house being 15,100 microwatts per meter squared, 15,000, where was that? Anyway, I think you get the gist of it. Okay, only one property was below one volt per meter. So we helped sort that situation out. RFNSA is where you get these environmental reports. So this was in Coogee, and on the report you'll always see the percentage. And you think, oh, well, it's only 4% of the limit. Well, that's 4% before you get burnt. 4% before you get burnt. So, okay, you think, well, that's a long way before I'm going to get burnt. But let's actually look at the numbers. So if you look carefully here, remember we were talking about 6,750 in the last one. Here, all of a sudden, at 0 to 50 meters. So if there's a small cell facility on a pole outside your house, that's 179.14 millivolts per meter, or 179,000, I'll say it again, 179,000 microwatts per meter squared, zooming into you 24 hours a day. Okay. And look at the volts per meter, 8.22. Okay. So as you can appreciate, thousands of times, 17,900 times above the recommendation for people in the 0 to 50 meters range. Okay. So we thought, wow, that's pretty full on. Okay. And then we were asked to look after another doctor where they were applying to put up a small cell facility in a very luxurious suburb in Sydney, but the house was very close to the fence and literally 5 meters away from his bedroom. From here to where you folks are sitting over there. He and his wife were going to be exposed to 207,700 microwatts per meter squared when they slept. And their daughter's room was right next door, so another meter on 6 meters. She would have had the same exposure as a young girl.
And this was a doctor we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And the other one before it, there were 8 doctors on that street.
Yeah.
And so yes, it's extremely
Scary stuff.
Yeah.
So based on all of that, now we come to 5G.
Dear.
Okay. So it's very alluring what's being offered to us. And of course, it's wonderful to be connected, to have everything interconnected, to pick up your phone and to be able to, when you're in Alaska, to be organizing your kids' schooling and paying bills and whatever while you're sitting on a remote mountaintop in the middle of nowhere. Because more than likely there'll be a tower, next door. Hobart and Darwin are proposed smart cities. Already we have smart telephone meters, which are terrible because firstly, these things are impossible to work, but secondly, the moment you're a second out of your parking meter, you're charged because it's all interconnected. So none of this sweet talking the meter maid anymore. But it's interconnectivity that has a dark side, and this is what we're going to look at. Remember, this is derived from military technology for interesting reasons. But 5G can work in the low gigahertz range, can work in the mid-range, which is 3.7 to 24, and also the high range, 24 gigahertz to 60 gigahertz and beyond. They're now talking about sub-terahertz, which is just under 1,000 gigahertz. This is where the industry is going. So we all know 5G radiation, it's an incredibly complex mix of different frequencies. Not only have we had to endure 2, 3, and 4G, but now we have 5G with all the health implications of it. This is a form of environmental pollution. No ifs or buts. Like other toxic exposures, the effects of radio frequency, electromagnetic radiation, is likely going to be impossible to tease out because we are now all contaminated. So there is no control group. You can't say these are unaffected people, these are people affected by 5G. We are all contaminated. And so getting a conclusion from that is going to be very, very epidemiologically difficult. I found this study amazing. This was a study performed in 1977, and if you cast your eye to the very last notation at the bottom here, the CIA released the study in 2010. What on earth would the CIA be doing with the study if it was just a study? And let's look at the study. Rats were exposed to 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared, which equates to 100,000 microwatts per meter squared. Now, you know what we've been already showing you, a lot of people were sleeping in a lot more than 100,000 microwatts per meter squared. Okay? And they were only exposed for 15 minutes, and they were exposed to 5 to 8 millimeter waves. So this is moving into the new 5G waves. And they were exposed daily for 60 days. And as I've said, weaker and very short exposure than the current 5G transmitters that are exposing us 24 hours a day. And what the author said was that long stay in these conditions in the decimeter and centimeter radio wave bands led to changes in their nervous system and cardiovascular system, and they developed a complex of systems which he or she called radio wave disease. And let's look at this. As we know, 5G doesn't penetrate the skin, but it's what it does to the skin that affects the whole body. It acts on skin nerve receptors, causing hypertrophy of those nerves and demyelination. Demyelination, what is demyelination? It's like stripping the coating off the nerves. Nerves cannot exist without a myelin sheath. There is bone marrow suppression and dysfunction of blood production, which comes obviously from bone marrow. So lymphopenia, reduced lymphocyte counts, reduction in hemoglobin and erythrocytes, and eosinophilia, which is an allergic-like, when you're bitten by a mozzie or bitten by a bee, you get a massive itchy reaction. That is the result of the mast cells releasing histamines, and those histamines make you very, very itchy. Well, that all starts off from a high eosinophil count. A lot of EHS patients will talk about a skin rash or an allergic-like event that happens on their skin. Not everyone, but some, when they are exposed to EMF. Okay, what was also found was that cortisol levels increased dramatically. Remember, cortisol is it's a buffer. It's our hormone that buffers us against life stressors. Cortisol is not a stress hormone. Cortisol is an anti-stress hormone that protects us from the stress of adrenaline. And what they found was not only was cortisol up, but adrenaline increased by 100% in these people, in these rats exposed to these 5G waves in this early research. And also ascorbic acid levels dropped. The highest concentration of ascorbic acid is in which organ? In the adrenals. The adrenals are definitely dependent on vitamin C. They found that there was mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are the tiny little organelles within the cells that are our energy houses. They make ATP. And if your mitochondria go down, you go down big time. Your eyes don't work, your brain doesn't work, your heart doesn't work well, your lungs don't breathe well, your gut doesn't perform its functions, your liver, your kidneys, your muscles, your bones, everything goes down when your mitochondria become dysfunctional. And what they found, there was a 64% reduction in oxidative phosphorylation in the liver and the kidneys. There was reduced energy production, reduced functional capacity. There was reduced DNA and RNA nucleic acid synthesis in the liver, the lungs, the heart, spleen, Okay, so dangerous stuff. So 5G promiscuity is literally in our face. It is injuring us as we speak. And for some people more than others, because we are not all genetically identical, and some of us draw the short straw with regard to our protective genes that protect us from oxidative stress. But the important thing about this is that these small cell facilities, because the 5G bandwidth is very short in the sense of how far it can go, you need to have repeaters every 200 to 300 meters. So as you now know, we're going to be street poles with these small cell facilities, which are surprisingly innocent looking boxes. Not like a huge tower with spikes everywhere, but just a little box or a little cylinder, which will be on your next street pole. Irradiating you with over 300,000 microwatts per meter squared. Okay. So I think this is going to be a massive health disaster, personally. Okay. So we were very kindly provided with an EME report by one of our organizers, and I'll just take you through it. If you look carefully, these were the existing facilities, Telstra and Vodafone and Optus facilities at this Hillary's, I guess is a suburb in your area. Forgive my ignorance. I fly in and fly out. Okay, but if you look on the right-hand side, the proposed facilities, you can see all of a sudden there is that rather unfortunate 5 with the G next to it, and this seems to be the facility over here. Okay, so let's get into the hard yards. So here, this is the existing configuration, and these poor people with all those 3G and 4G systems were, you can see 50 to 100 meters were exposed to, so that's 28,000 microwatts, 28,000 microwatts per meter squared at 50 to 100 meters away, going up to 152,000 microwatts, okay, 100 to 200 meters away. But this is existing. Now, look what happens. So, and you can see how these, the 3Gs and 4Gs, their biggest concentration is about 100 to 200 meters away. You can see 200 to 300, 147,000, then it drops down. But if you look on, and just to remind you, the electric field in volts per meter was all massively high, 3s going up to 7. Look what happens here. Suddenly, at 0 to 50 meters, 10.64, 11.03, 9.15, and 300,000 microwatts per meter squared up to 50 meters, continuing up to 100 meters, 322,000, 200 meters dropping down to 215,000, way above, sky high above. Even 500 meters, look at this, 500 meters still at just under 6,000, which was the highest concentration of the Wilson's Creek. And this is 500 meters away from this conglomeration, this nest, this like viper's nest of electromagnetic stuff. Okay. So, okay, there's going to be a bit of technical stuff. I'll just rush through it quite quickly. They talk about the 5G being released in bursts, and these bursts can cause heating spikes, and they look at the peak to average temperature, and with 5G it's 30 to 240 seconds, and that can cause tissue damage. But ICNIRP allows it to go up to the peak to average temperature to go up to 1,000 seconds. At 1,000 seconds, this is going to promote tissue damage. Okay, some of the reported damage to human and animal and plant tissues: skin damage, reproductive damage to sperm, damage to the retina, the lens, immune system disruption, metabolic disruption, insect populations are disappearing. I have a wonderful ecologist who consulted me up in Mullumbimby who would take people on one of the back ranges to go and look at the ecology, and they put a tower up on top of this, and he has seen all the insects just disappearing, frogs disappearing, ants dying, disappearing, no insects anywhere in the vicinity of this tower. There is some wonderful information at this website, which is Doctors for Safe Technology 5G Mobile Communications. So they're advocates for safe use of this potentially hazardous telecommunications system. And I suggest you go, wonderful research papers. The 2018 European Commission Scientific Committee on Health and Environment Health, Environment and Emerging Risks, called the SHEAR Committee, say that the lack of clear evidence to inform the development of exposure guidelines to 5G technology leaves open the possibility of unintended biological consequences. The human skin is an antenna in the sub-terahertz range. And what they have found is that the sweat glands, when we sweat, and the more we sweat under emotional or physical stress, those sweat glands reflect radiation more. And those sweat glands are in our skin. So when you get these high peaks, these high pulses of radiation, this is being reflected. I just had a gentleman today telling me about he had a metal implant put in his neck after an injury, and he became electromagnetically sensitive as a result of this. People with amalgam fillings, the amalgams are reflectors. These are transmitters. Never forget that, you know, all of us of the rather older age group in this room, or esteemed age group in this room, we have had amalgam fillings put in. And these amalgam fillings are highly, highly toxic from a building biology point of view, from many points of view. Lowers immune function, acts as a transmitter for radiation, etc., and pollutes us with oxidized mercury and methyl mercury. Okay. So this is fascinating. This is an extraordinary slide. You've probably never seen such a busy slide as this. But the reason why I put it on is because human keratinocytes, which are human skin cells, they looked at the gene expression modification with 5G, and they found that after 6 hours of exposure, there were 5 genes whose expression altered. And these are very, very important genes, and this could explain why 5G is so problematic. And the one gene was a CRIP2 gene, a cysteine-rich intestinal protein. Very, very important as a repressor of nuclear factor kappa beta, which is a pro-inflammatory nuclear factor that promotes inflammation and promotes cancer production. And it's also, and now remember what CRIP2 does is it suppresses NF kappa B. So when CRIP2 is abnormally expressed, then its suppression of NF kappa B is not going to happen. So there's a much higher likelihood of things going wrong. The same thing with plexin D1. And again, I might just have to, plexin D1, when it is mutated, this can cause a condition called Mobius syndrome, which is a neurological disorder characterized by facial nerve paralysis. What about pentraxin? That's PTX3. Pentraxin is also a cancer suppressor, an oncosuppressor regulating component. And what it does is when it is mutated, PTX3 mutations or epigenetic silencing of this particular gene can result in complement-driven factor. Complement is one of the inflammatory factors that promotes cancer. So you can see just from this that there are some very, very interesting reasons, biological reasons, why 5G could be a problem. There's also the SERPINE gene, which is related to anti-angiogenesis and anti-tumorigenic and neurotrophic actions. So when the SERPINE gene is abnormally expressed, again, those anti-angiogenic factors, angiogenesis is the growth of blood vessels, which is necessary for growth of all of us. We've all had angiogenesis to get to the body shape and height that we are, but we don't want angiogenesis when we're mature and developed, because that an increase in the factors that increase angiogenesis can lead to cancer. Okay, and then there's this what's it called, TRPV2, which is a calcium channel receptor, and they found that TRPV2 deficient mice have rapid cardiac function deterioration because calcium channels are not working correctly. Okay, so Professor Leonard Hardell has started a 5G appeal for physicians and PhDs to come together and to submit to the EU to please stop rolling out 5G. That we believe as health professionals, and I'll put my name down on this too. So you'll see there are 231 doctors so far. I'll put my name down if they accept me or not. Oh, there we go, over there. to try and judiciously, if it is going to be rolled out, that it's rolled out judiciously with the right safety measures. The US Telecommunications Authority are paving the way for the rollout of 5G, saying that in their document that this is part of a national strategy to timely and build out of this new infrastructure across the country, examining regulatory impediments that unnecessarily slow this down. There's no mention of health risks, no long-term studies. Okay, I need to move through this quite quickly because time's moving on. Okay, so the bio-initiative charts you can download. I just want to bring to your attention levels as low as 0.006, which is, that's in, you can see the units microwatts per centimeter squared. When we add on 100 there, the microwatts per centimeter becomes microwatts per meter. So we lose 2 noughts here, so it becomes 0.06. So already at 0.06 microwatts per meter squared, people are suffering. You've got fatigue, depression, sleeping disorders, concentration difficulties, cardiovascular problems. Already people in this room know this stuff who are electromagnetically sensitive, that they react in like seemingly normal situations. They go, oh my God, I can't think, I've got pain, I've got a headache, my eyes can't focus, I'm feeling exhausted. And when we go on and look at some of, let's go up a bit and look at changes in immune function at 100, so that would be at 10,000 microwatts per meter squared, changes in immune function. And you can see here at 500 microwatts per centimeter squared, which is 50,000 microwatts per meter squared, well within what we've all been exposed to. Guys in this room, this pertains to you, a 24% drop in testosterone function. So if your partner or wife starts complaining, turn off the Wi-Fi. But are we on the same page? Medical symptoms of ill health have been detected as low as 0.06 microwatts per meter squared. Sleep disturbance, depression, fatigue, heart problems. And yet the standard allows us to be exposed to up to 10 million microwatts per meter squared, 24 hours a day. Adults, children, babies, pregnant mothers, healthy and sick. Okay? Because the standard says that there are no ill effects from electromagnetic radiation. So let's go visit some of these towers. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly. This is a study in Brazil where they found that the density of, and you can see the numbers down here, we're only looking at 4,078 microwatts per meter squared. People were getting cancer. You'll see in the next slide, and the greatest concentration was around, the red dots are the mobile phone towers, and the blue crosses are obviously deaths. The greatest concentration of deaths was around the greatest concentration of mobile towers. In Netanya in Israel, they started the research program before the tower went in. They had 622 people. They had 1,200 people living a long way away from the tower. And the people living close to the tower, 8 out of 622 developed cancer. It was a 4-fold increase as opposed to only 2 per 1,222. And the latency period was really short, it was only 2 years. And so there's real causal concern that the two are related. There's a study in Austria where they were looking at the distance from this mobile tower, either less than 200 meters or beyond 1,200 meters. And they looked in the radio frequency groups of 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000 or greater than 1,000. And as expected, they found that the radio frequency, once you got into above 1,000, was very much high, 23 times higher risk of breast cancer. But wait, you know how they say, but wait, there's more. The brain cancer was 122 times increased, the risk of brain cancer. And I put this 121 times. So I put this on a graph. You can see brain cancer greater than 1,000 microwatts, 121 times increased. Even at 100 to 1,000, which is not a lot of radio frequency, look at that 3.4. That's a 240% increased risk of all cancers, of breast cancer, and 20.3 of brain cancer. So epidemiological evidence, this was from Dr. Vinny Kurana, who's an Australian surgeon who's working with Professor Ardell. 8 out of 10 epidemiological studies reported adverse neurobehavioral symptoms or cancer in populations living less than 500 meters from a base station. Okay, how about having that just over your roof? Okay, and what did people notice? Nausea, headaches, dizziness, irritability, discomfort, nervousness, depression, sleep disturbance, memory loss, and the lowering of libido. Okay, the European Parliament has made some recommendations to adopt, and I'll just show you over here, to keep it low, at 1 microwatt per meter squared. But obviously those recommendations haven't been adhered to by the large organizations. EU Parliament adopts a resolution on the potential dangers of EMF based on the Bio-Initiative report, and the earlier one, the 2007. EMF radiation related illness. So this was the first start of EMF syndrome, and this has been brought through by this extraordinary medical association in Austria. So the Austrian Medical Association are probably the world leaders in recognizing what they call EMF syndrome. And they found that people in this early Swiss study complained that the biggest problem were the base stations, and then cell phones, then cordless phones. Never forget the danger of cordless phones. That is a mini base station in your hallway. And so there's a biological rationale for EMF sickness, or the new term is electromagnetic hypersensitivity. You also see in the research they use the word electro-hypersensitivity. It's all the same thing. And that the plausible mechanism, this is where it gets interesting, is oxidative and nitrositive stress. Oxidative nitrositive stress, okay. From superoxide and from nitric oxide together, forming this Voldemort, dare I say, Voldemort of free radicals, peroxynitrite. Okay, a nasty piece of work which can massively damage neurological structures. This is moving very quickly now at a legislative level, where in Sweden the condition is recognized, and EHS sufferers, like a number of people in this room, if they have to go to hospital, they get a private room which has a Faraday cage around it, and they are protected, and they can go to Centrelink and get protection from the government. I am forever fighting with Centrelink, because these people can't work. Where can you work where there's no computer and no Wi-Fi? It's almost impossible. You've got to go pick cabbages in the middle of nowhere, or go mine for opals in Cuba Pedy underground or something. Otherwise, there is Wi-Fi everywhere. And so as more and more countries become aware of the dangers of this, there will be more legislation protecting these people. These people are the canaries of the 21st century. They are heralding what's going to come to us if no restrictions are put in place. So the Australian Medical Association gives an algorithm of how to go through the assessment of these patients. And this pertains especially to doctors, what to look for, the questionnaire, the bloods to be done, the guidelines for measurement, people such as yourself to bring in a building biologist or a building engineer to do all the right measurements, which are expertly correlated and referenced. So you know exactly what you're dealing with, which machines to use, and how to get the results accurately. This is fascinating, this slide. Let's just look carefully. So low frequency alternating magnetic fields, whether in the microtesla, above 0.4, very far above normal, less than 0.02 within normal limits, according to the Austrian Medical Association. Low frequency alternating electric fields, above 10 volts per meter, very far above, less than 0.3, this is what we should aim to sleep in. And as far as radio frequency, above 1,000, very far above normal, less than 1 within normal limits. Okay. And then they say, as far as prevention goes, if you just think of the word unplug everything at night. Unplug Wi-Fi, unplug electrical cords, unplug everything, turn off and unplug. Okay. Ophansa on EHS doesn't believe it exists, thinks it's a mental condition called central sensitization, says there's no clear evidence. It's quite sad. And when their advice they suggest is interesting. On the basis of current scientific information, there's no established evidence that EHS is caused by EMF at levels below the exposure guidelines. Arpenza acknowledges that the health symptoms experienced by the affected individuals are real and can be a disabling problem, and advise those affected to seek medical advice from a qualified medical specialist.
That's why we have doctors.
Okay. So guys, look at this. So what I tell to people is a lot of my EHS patients are forever being fobbed off and sent to psychiatrists or to psychologists. But there are biological markers of electromagnetic hypersensitivity. And this is the great work of Professor Belpohm, Christine Campagnac, and Philippe Irigaray. And their paper in 2015 is called Reliable Disease Biomarkers Characterizing and Identifying Electrohypersensitivity and Multiple Chemical Sensitivity as two etiologic aspects of a unique pathological disorder. A unique pathological disorder. Okay. They looked at 727 patients. Most of them had EHS, 71%, and look at what they found. They found that histamine levels were raised in 40% of patients. Nitrotyrosine, which is the damaging of the amino acid tyrosine by nitrosative stress marker peroxynitrite, was raised in 28% of people. Protein S100B, which is a blood-brain barrier permeability marker, was increased in a small amount. I find a lot of people have a lot of these profoundly raised. O-myelin autoantibodies were also raised, as were the heat shock proteins, which protect us against heat shock. These are genes that encode proteins called heat shock proteins that are trying to, they're the angels of the body going around trying to keep us alive. So heat shock protein levels were raised in a number of patients. 100% of patients have reduced levels of melatonin. Melatonin is a one-stop shop. It's a one-man band. It is not only regulating our sleep rhythms, it is a potent anti-cancer substance in its own right, and it is a potent antioxidant, and it organizes hormones. So when your melatonin levels drop, you're in trouble. They also perform what's called, it's unpronounceable, tomostigmography, which is basically doing an ultrasound of the temporal vasculature, and they find hypoperfusion, reduced perfusion in the capsulothalamic area. Okay. The new paper by Irigaray and Belpohm also found that there are other markers like the other reactive oxygen species like the T-bars, malondialdehyde, which is a lipid peroxidation fat oxidation marker, which we can test for, nitrotyrosine. So 30 to 50% of EHS patients suffered from the GSSG is oxidized glutathione, which is the universal antioxidant of the body. And the reason why I'm bringing this in is because we can use supplements to counteract this, counterbalance this. So additional markers, good old vitamin D. We never think all that much of vitamin D. We make vitamin D through the sun, but some of us may not because of polymorphisms of the genes that encode the proteins that convert sunlight into active forms of vitamin D. So we check vitamin D levels, we're circulating IgE, because once IgE is high, IgE can cause histamines to be released. So high sensitivity C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation, is also tested. And a lot of EHS sufferers have high levels of these things. So these are the inflammatory markers that I've gone through. We look at 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine, which is a DNA damage marker. This is your damaged DNA. We can actually measure that now. And we can do that on urine. Blood-brain barrier markers, protein S100B, autoantibodies to myelin, we can't get as yet. And these are other markers which have also been recommended. And the rationale, this is one slide. I'm sorry, I just need to go through this word by word, because once you get this slide, you will get EHS. So upon brain injury, degeneration, or infection, the inflammatory response may trigger degranulation of the mast cells, leading to massive release of histamines in the blood. IgE activation is necessary for mast cell degranulation. That's why we measure IgE. Histamine is an inflammatory mediator, and it induces astrocytes, which are brain cells, to release calcium-binding protein S100B, and that causes blood-brain barrier permeability. The brain is sacrosanct. It's in this chalice, in this bony chalice, and it's not only protected from the outside world, but it's protected from our own body. And when blood-brain barrier permeability is disrupted, then the poisons of our own body damage our brain. crazy stuff. Okay, inflammation, so when there's inflammation, cells produce nitric oxide and superoxide, and together they form peroxynitrite. Remember Valdemort? This is the Valdemort of EHS. Damaging the protein nitrotyrosine, and we can measure nitrotyrosine levels. So high nitrotyrosine is a sign of peroxynitrite damage. This is not something you can make up. You've either got it or you haven't got it. And affected people have this. Repetitive stress of non-thermal EMF causes an increase of heat shock protein expression. So when you're constantly being stressed, your heat shock proteins go up. But if the stress goes on for too long, your heat shock proteins drop, then you're really in trouble. Okay. And autoantibodies, the fascinating thing about autoantibodies is the proteins within the brain become denatured, and when they divide, the new epitopes become dysfunctional. So a lot of my chronic fatigue patients, when they're constantly exposed, they find that their overall concentration just is like permanently damaged. It's just gone. They're just not as good as they used to be. This is devastating. So it's driven by neuroinflammation. Remember neuroinflammation. We've spoken about melatonin, how important it is, and how that when melatonin levels drop, this opens up a whole new field of neurodegenerative disease and cancer. You see why I get so passionate about this. Because we are personally, as we speak now, being affected. We're being subjected to radiation from lights, from everybody's phones. We're all being affected. But some of us more so than others. So it's a sentinel pathological disorder. So the interphone study, this was a crazy study. I would love to spend 2 hours talking to you about it. This was very poorly methodologically put together. But in spite of all of this, they still found that people who used the phone for more than 10 years or for over 1,600 hours got themselves into a lot of trouble. Okay. So as I say, interphone, bias upon bias, layers of bias you cannot believe, and this is a scientific study. But in spite of all of that, it showed that people were still high phone use on the side that you use the phone, increased risk of cancer. Okay, and there's this exceptionally profound treatise by Lloyd Morgan over here. I'm almost finished, Ray. And this is by extraordinary people in this area. I've highlighted the names like Vinnie Purana and David Teo, Charlie Teo, the extraordinary surgeon, neurosurgeon in Sydney, are all behind this document. Martin Blank from the US, David Carpenter, the co-author or the co-editor of this report, and all these very eminent people behind endorsing this very, very quickly. So there are 15 concerns. One is that industry's own research showed cell phones cause brain cancer. Amazing. The interphone study, can you believe it? The interphone study said people who were light users were actually protected. Light users of mobile phones were protected from getting brain cancer. But they finally realized that clearly there's something wrong with the methodology of people who are protected using their phone. This is how, dare I say, corrupt the whole process was. Okay. Independent research shows that there's risk of brain tumors from cell phone use. The systemic protective skewing of all results in the interphone study, significant risk of brain tumors from cell phone use was still found, as I said earlier. Okay, and so on and so forth. One thing I wanted to show you that was very interesting was, I think maybe we passed it, was basically that every hour you use your phone, that increases your risk of brain cancer. Every year longer you use your phone, that increases your risk. Children using mobile phones increases their risk of brain cancer exponentially over adults. I'm not making this up, but this is what has been found. Okay, guys, sorry. Girls, you'll have your turn, but this is guys. Male fertility is massively damaged by cell phone radiation. You should never, we don't carry bags. We have our phone in our pockets. And what's been found that men who keep their phone in their right hand pocket are more prone to right testicular cancer. And that's the phone not in use. Men with a phone in the left pocket, left testicular cancer. Okay. So we know about reduced fertility, But let's just look at that in detail. So this was a study by Agarwal on 363 men who were infertile, and they looked at their at the sperm, at the quality of the sperm. And what was found was, if you use your phone for 2 to 4 hours or more than 4 hours, your production of all the important things that makes sperm work, they didn't work. Okay. So even the volume didn't change. So I put it all on the document. You can see here, no mobile phone to more than 4 hours. So the volume didn't change, liquefaction didn't change, pH did change, became more alkaline. But the amount of sperm changed from 85 million per unit volume, whatever that was, maybe it was a mil, down to 50 million. And the motility reduced from 69 down to 44. And the viability reduced from 71 down to 47. And the, what's the last thing? The morphology percent, the shape, the anatomical shape, reduced from 40 down to 18%. Crazy stuff. Okay. And they subjected rats to Wi-Fi, the very Wi-Fi we've got in our homes right now. And these were just rats exposed to 24 hours Wi-Fi for 20 weeks. And they found this DNA damage marker. DNA damage marker is a marker that your DNA can go to a point of such damage that it becomes cancer DNA or oncogenic DNA. So the higher this DNA damage marker, 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine, the higher the risk of degeneration, and definitely cancerous degeneration. They also found that antioxidants like catalase and glutathione peroxidase were reduced in these poor mice. So what about this? So I stand, the old proverbial cliche, I stand on the shoulders of giants. I am, just as I said, working to help people, but the work that's been done by the doctors of the Bio Initiative report, these are the giants. They have put this mammoth document together. It is really an extraordinary document which says that the scientific benchmark of 0.03 microwatts per centimeter squared, or 0.3 microwatts per meter. Can you see I've underlined it over there? That's the benchmark that we should try and achieve, because this is the lowest observed level of health detriment, of health effects. And they apply a 10-fold reduction to compensate for the lack of long-term exposure, to provide a safety buffer of chronic exposure if needed, and especially for our children who are the most sensitive. And they come up with a 0.03 microwatts per meter squared. That's what we should aim to achieve. So the Bio Initiative group have written a letter to the WHO, because unfortunately there's endemic cross-population between these large organizations and industry. And unfortunately, as they say in here, that no heed is being taken to documents such as this, or any research which is attributing EHS to danger to human health. So as far as I'm concerned, as far as what this does to our brain, there's no good, it's just bad and ugly. And if you follow the dots, these are these extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields. Radio frequency cause reactive oxygen species, which cause blood-brain barrier permeability, change in cerebral blood flow, brain metabolism changes, epigenetic changes, DNA damage changes, gene induction changes, and calcium changes, which can lead to electromagnetic hypersensitivity and cancer. And thanks to Professor Valpone for this extraordinary correlation, joining the dots. And so these professors and eminent scientists who are trying to protect us all have said it is urgent that national and international bodies, particularly the WHO, take this significant public health hazard seriously and make appropriate recommendations for protective measures to reduce exposures. This is especially urgently needed for children and adolescents. It is also important that all parts of society, especially the medical community, educators, and the general public, become informed about the hazards associated with exposure to EMF and of the steps that can easily be taken to reduce exposure and risk of associated disease. One of the people pushing for global connectivity and balloons in space and satellites in space beaming down on us and getting us all connected is Peter Diamantis, it's a great idea, but we will get injured. I cannot imagine the EMF fallout. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. Has anybody heard of a Li-Fi? Never mind Wi-Fi, Li-Fi. Li-Fi uses LED, and LED is going to be the technology of the future, way after 5G has come and gone. If we're still alive, it seems like we'll be safe in Li-Fi. It's apparently very safe. Okay, and so the invitation to the regulatory authorities as we close is please, as you would care for your very own children, care for the public at large as well. Do not subject us to dangerous, damaging, cancer-causing electromagnetic radiation without specifying what these dangers are and how to protect ourselves from it. And protecting those who are most vulnerable, like children and people who are sensitive to these electromagnetic fields. And so we need to wake up, or 5G is going to bring an epidemic of catastrophic proportions on us. We need to care for our affected. EHS patients are really the canaries of the 21st century. The valuable research that has been done needs to be looked at, regardless of the cost. Using the precautionary principle, if we protect the most vulnerable, then all of us are protected. We need to wake up to avoid a catastrophe. Thank you very much, everybody.